This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer sitting in tonight for Dan Rather. Good evening. Libya charged today that the United States is using stories about a chemical weapons plant as a pretext to launch a military attack. The Libyan news agency claims that the United States plans to send a hit squad into Libya to kill Muammar Gaddafi. The Reagan administration is, in fact, not ruling out a military strike against the plant, which it says is on the verge of producing chemical weapons. The United States has also protested to the West German government, charging that a German company is helping to set up the factory. From London, Chief European Correspondent Tom Fenton begins our report.
The West German government, under pressure from Washington, said today it is investigating Imhausen Chemie. The U.S. alleges the German firm is at the center of a web of foreign companies that have helped Libya build a huge chemical weapons plant. The Libyans deny that the plant, 40 miles south of Tripoli, makes chemical weapons. Colonel Gaddafi has consistently maintained it is only a pharmaceutical factory.
President Gaddafi, I want to make sure that I understand that you are not building chemical weapons in your country at all.
No.
Yes, none at all.
But U.S. officials describe it as the largest chemical weapons factory in the third world and say it is about to begin production.
From the evidence that's come out so far, including the size, who sold it to them, and the potential defenses around it, it would seem to be that is the case. You don't put surface-to-air missile batteries around a small medicine factory.
The Iran-Iraq war, where Iraq used mustard and nerve gas, was a deadly demonstration of this cheap and effective weapon. The U.S. believes Gaddafi is now set to manufacture similar chemical agents.
It's very important, especially if he has chemical weapons as well as aerial refueling capabilities that would enable his relatively short-range fighter bombers to reach targets in Egypt and Israel.
The last time the United States had a case against Libya, it sent bombers based in Britain and the U.S. Sixth Fleet to attack Tripoli. Even though there was a clear case of Libyan involvement in terrorism, Europeans, with the exception of Britain's Prime Minister Thatcher, refused to cooperate in the raid. This time, the Europeans hope the U.S. will limit its action against Libya to diplomatic and economic pressure. Just as in 1986, they are worried about damaging their business interest in the Middle East and about the possibility of becoming targets for Libyan terrorist attacks. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
Standing by now at the Pentagon is Pentagon correspondent David Martin. David, how real a possibility is a military strike against that plant?
Well, Bob, based on the few guarded conversations you can have with officials on a subject like this, there's no doubt in my mind that if Libya continues with that plant as is, the U.S. will attempt to knock it out. There are people in this building who are normally very, very reluctant even to consider the use of military force, who will tell you that Muammar Gaddafi simply cannot be allowed to get his hands on chemical weapons. And planning has already progressed to the point of calculating winds so that if there is a strike, the resulting winds or the resulting fumes would not drift down over populated areas.
So when would you think it would be likely that such an attack would happen, if indeed such an attack is launched?
Well, I think there are a couple of dates to put on the calendar. The first is January 7th, which is the start of an international conference on chemical weapons in Paris, at which the U.S. is going to bring all the diplomatic pressure it can to bear on Libya to somehow change the configuration of that plant so that it cannot produce chemical weapons. If the U.S. is going to resort to military force, it first must be seen as exhausting all diplomatic measures. So I don't think a strike is likely before the end of that conference on January 11th. The next marker would be the change of administrations here on January 20th. The Reagan administration may decide this is an issue they simply cannot leave to the Bush administration for the simple fact that a new administration would feel compelled to reinvent the wheel and rethink the problem from the start. The final marker is the date, uncertain, when this plant goes into full-scale production. Now, Libyan officials have indicated to CBS News that that is still about 3 months away.
When you speak of an attack, is there any theory as yet as to what kind of an attack it would be?
The most likely scenario is cruise missiles launched from submarines off the coast of Libya. Using unmanned cruise missiles avoids the danger of losing pilots, and it also avoids the need to ask other countries for overflight rights.
All right. Thank you very much, David. It's been almost 2 weeks now since Pan Am Flight 103 was blown out of the sky over Lockerbie, Scotland. Investigators found more of that wreckage today And they checked a new theory about how the bomb got onto the plane. But they still don't know who did it. More on that from Mark Phillips.
A military honor guard greeted the bodies of 6 military personnel killed on Pan Am 103 as they arrived at Dover Air Force Base today. As investigators back in Lockerbie are still trying to figure out how the bomb was placed on board the plane. Prosecutors in West Germany are now following a new lead, saying that several bags of military mail were placed aboard the plane unchecked. In fact, letters and packages often fly both overseas and domestically without being checked because the post office insists on maintaining exclusive control of the mails. Experts say it's a gap in the security system.
The Postal Service, to my knowledge, does nothing to examine that mail with any sort of security examination.
There was another airline scare today. In New York, passengers from 2 Scandinavian Airways flights had all their bags offloaded for identification after SAS received a tip of a bomb threat from Hungarian police.
The luggage that wasn't identified was left on the tarmac.
I think it makes a difference when you see that they are actually working on security, that you just don't walk on board without anybody asking you questions or without anybody checking your luggage.
The new security measures announced by the Federal Aviation Administration were a response to this environment of constant threats. But security experts are still saying that unless the U.S. airlines adopt the screening system used by the Israeli carrier El Al, their flights are not safe.
I am not satisfied that all is being done that should be done. In fact, I won't fly a U.S. carrier in Europe or the Middle East.
With no hard information on how the bomb got aboard Pan Am 103, investigators have said they're willing to accept information from anywhere, even from PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat, who has reportedly offered to help. But President Reagan said today that no official information has been received from Arafat so far. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Washington.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News, John Blackstone on trouble in the air in Wolf Point, Montana, and Susan Spencer on Jim and Tammy, back on the air in the new year.
If they could see you now, they'd see you're having fun. Taking in the sights and playing in the sun. They won't believe that you are such a good sport. Buying all those gifts in a tropical port. All I can say is, wow, I'm having such a ball. What a function, holy cow. They'd never believe it if your friends could see you now.
Take a 3, 4, 7-day cruise on Carnival, the most popular cruise line in the world.
Jimmy! It's Jimmy! Happy birthday, buddy! Sounds like you're in the next row.
With 30 free minutes from U.S. Sprint,
Happy birthday, Jimmy!
you can afford to talk to more relatives
Just like he's in the next room.
than ever before.
Happy birthday, Jimmy!
Tell him we had asparagus. He loves asparagus.
Happy birthday,
Happy birthday, Jimmy!
Okay, everybody, we're gonna sing happy birthday.
Ready? Set?
To get your 30 minutes of free long distance, pick up the phone right now. Call U.S. Sprint and switch.
Got a nice minty taste to it.
That's good.
Can you say that about your liquid antacid? If not, taste new Tums Liquid.
It has a nice taste to it. It's delicious. Tums tastes the best.
New Tums Liquid. It works, and it really tastes good.
These coupons are good for fine products and more. They're good for Special Olympics. For each one redeemed, Procter & Gamble will donate 10 cents to help keep the dream alive. Look for them in your Publishers Clearinghouse mail now.
At midnight on New Year's Eve, the 12-nation European community banned imports of hormone-treated meat from this country. The United States retaliated, but U.S. officials say they are hopeful that the issue can be resolved before it becomes an all-out trade war. Business correspondent Ray Brady is here with that.
Consumers may soon see the price of these imported hams start shooting up, along with juices and some alcoholic beverages and other European foods. Uncle Sam has slapped a stiff tariff on them.
The prices are going to be astronomical. It's double the price.
When Italian tomatoes go up in price, domestic tomato prices could rise as well, and tomatoes go into a lot of dishes. Pizza prices, some say, could jump 15 to 18%, and so could many restaurant prices.
A dinner might cost you $20. It's automatically going to cost, let's say, $27, $30 per person.
That same increase in prices will cost importer Eugenio Pasolini $2 million a year in lost sales.
These will cost around $6. We will not... $6. We will not import them anymore.
It's a trade battle set off by these U.S. cattle. They're fed growth hormones. The Europeans now say they won't buy American beef, charging the hormones are dangerous. U.S. experts say there's no scientific evidence to prove that.
There is overwhelming pressure from the consumer movement in Europe for the abolition of hormones. And I think the talk about scientific evidence is not really central to the point.
If we can eat it, I can't imagine why they shouldn't be able to eat it.
Well, only $130 million in U.S. beef is involved. The U.S. and Europe do $145 billion a year in trade, and this battle could escalate. Already, Europe is talking about putting penalties on U.S. honey, walnuts, and other foods going over there.
We have to look at that list, give it a last touch, and then consider whether or not to apply these sanctions on those lines.
The general view in the United States is we've got to be firm on this to put down our marker and show that we're not going to be pushed around.
While consumers have a lot to lose in all this, so do Europe and the U.S., leading to the hope that once both are done with the threats and recrimination, they may yet be able to work things out to have a trade peace instead of a trade war. Bob?
Thank you, Ray. The Department of Transportation is cutting $6 million from a $30 million program that subsidizes air service to more than 100 isolated communities in this country. The department's drawing up a list of at least 30 communities that will be cut from the so-called Essential Air Services program. John Blackstone flew into one of the towns. It's been told it may be on the list.
On its daily journey across Montana, Big Sky Airlines Flight 3805 crosses some of the emptiest countryside in the lower 48 states. On board, it helps to have a pioneering spirit.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have tried the approach twice to Glasgow. We're unable to find the airport due to low ceilings and snow conditions. We are proceeding on to Wolf Point at this time.
But passengers who must travel in these parts don't have much choice.
Well, most of Montana is pretty remote.
There's no other way of getting around.
Soon, there may not be this way of getting to Wolf Point either. So few passengers use Flight 3805 that it loses money almost every time it flies. Now, the federal subsidies which help pay for this flight and for air service to more than 100 other remote towns are going to be cut back.
The subsidies started 10 years ago to ensure that after the airline industry was deregulated, isolated communities like Wolf Point would still get air service. But now the Transportation Department says it's time to stop the subsidies and let profits decide who gets air service and who doesn't.
They've seen these various lifelines disappear, small bus service, rail service, and in several of the cases out here, they're looking at this as their last lifeline to the national transportation system.
The Wolf Point International Airport never managed to live up to that name, but for 30 years it has helped this town of 3,500, 300 miles from just about anywhere, feel it is part of the rest of America. Wolf Point's mayor, Jack Lambert, says air service is vital to diversify the economy here.
Montana's had hard times, both anything from coal, oil, which we have in this area, agriculture, forest products, they're all depressed.
One of the few growing industries employs 55 people making specialty tools for handling glass.
At a point where we're planning to expand, and if we do it here, we almost have to have the airline service.
And it's not just for business that Wolf Point depends on the airline. Doctors fly in, too.
Without the air service, there's no way a specialist could get up here to provide the care. It's too long a drive.
If Wolf Point does lose air service, it will still be better off than many other out-of-the-way towns. The train still stops here, but Minneapolis is 18 hours away. Seattle, 26.
This is the late 80s. You got to keep up with technology.
So you need the plane.
I need the plane.
We're ready to board 3805. Can I have you follow me out now?
Even if Wolf Point is not one of the towns that loses its subsidy on March 1st, those who depend on Flight 3805 will take little comfort. The Department of Transportation is pushing to end all the subsidies. Some of the most remote parts of the country are feeling more isolated than ever. John Blackstone, CBS News, Wolf Point, Montana.
Officials in Guatemala say at least 59 people died when a ferry boat sank off the Caribbean coast. 6 more were still missing today. Survivors said that the ferry's engine broke down a few miles short of land. A tugboat then tried to tow it, but as it got underway, the passengers panicked and ran to one side of the deck, and the boat turned over. In Brazil, survivors from a New Year's Eve pleasure boat disaster claimed today that the vessel went down because it was overcrowded, but the owners denied that. At least 51 people died when that boat capsized in rough seas during a midnight fireworks show off Rio de Janeiro. The Archbishop of Managua began the new year by blasting the human rights records of the Nicaraguan government. Cardinal Obaño y Bravo charged that by denying freedom, the Sandinistas have created an exodus of professional workers and peasants. Well, the evidence of that is here in the United States. A massive influx of undocumented Nicaraguans and now a crackdown against the aliens by the U.S. government. James Hattori reports.
1,000 Nicaraguans a week cross the border into South Texas. Applications for political asylum have doubled this year. It's prompted a crackdown on the asylum program. Now, at the immigration office, lines grow long as the government tries to separate political refugees from those simply fleeing poverty. Until recently, Nicaraguans arriving in Texas were free to travel and work while their asylum cases were processed. Now, the Immigration and Naturalization Service has turned South Texas into a giant refugee holding pen.
The people are getting told that they must remain here for 30 days pending the decision on their asylum application. They aren't allowed to leave, and they also aren't allowed to work.
In fact, the Border Patrol is not stopping Nicaraguans from leaving the area, although most refugees don't know that.
Asylum is being abused, and there is a number of people entering the United States who've heard that if you use the word asylum, you get to stay here.
The U.S. accepts refugees fleeing political persecution, but not those fleeing the economic chaos in Nicaragua. Many refugees here have no place to go and no way to support themselves. The lucky ones stay in church shelters, but they are full. Many sleep where they can, in open fields, and this abandoned hotel. Here, a family of 12 lives in one room. No water, no electricity, precious little money. We are willing to obey the law, she says. Just let us go to my husband's house in Miami. While some refugees protest their treatment, many Texans worry about the influx of Nicaraguans.
I'd like to ask them why in the world they're causing trouble.
When our citizens get a little concerned of people wandering all over town, knocking on doors, begging for food and money and clothing, some people get they're scared.
Local officials want federal help for the refugees. The INS says its only responsibility is to speed up the asylum process. It's also sending a message.
To deter others from coming who might have a false notion that somehow, if we just get there, we're home free.
A number of refugees here say if they'd known it was going to be such a hardship, they would not have come. But they're here, passing the holiday under a makeshift Christmas tree, with little food or clothing, waiting for asylum. James Hattori, CBS News, Brownsville, Texas.
British and French reports today say 17 more survivors have been found in the earthquake in Soviet Armenia. The reports say the survivors were rescued from the ruins of a bread factory in the devastated town of Spitak. The 17 had reportedly lived for 24 days on grain and melted snow. The Soviet news agency has not confirmed as yet this story.
When my arthritis pain acts up, even little things are a big effort. But I don't take aspirin anymore. I take Advil. Advil is the brand many doctors recommend for hours of relief from minor arthritis pain. You know, just one Advil is as effective as 2 regular aspirin. And Advil doesn't upset my stomach the way aspirin sometimes can. So now, I don't even have to think about arthritis. Advil, tablets and caplets, advanced medicine for pain.
How will you live in the next century? Suddenly, life will be more comfortable, smoother, and quicker. Introducing the new 1989 Buick Century with premium features you expect from the best-selling Buick on the American road. all at a price that will let you enter the next century very comfortably.
The great American road belongs to Buick.
AT&T called this morning. They wanted to know why we switched to MCI. So I told them MCI showed me how with Prism Plus we could consolidate all our Watts lines on our regular business lines. Something they never did for me. Of course, then they claimed they could do the same thing. I said, then why didn't you tell me that a year ago? End of phone call.
Until you call, you'll never know how much better a long-distance company can be. MCI. Let us show you.
On this day in 1921, religious services were broadcast for the first time as a Pittsburgh radio station carried the regular Sunday services from a local church. Well, today there was a kind of footnote to the long and varied history of religious broadcasting. Jim and Tammy Bakker returned to the air. Susan Spencer reports.
Welcome to Jim and Tammy, live from their home via satellite.
2 years since a sex and money scandal drove them off the air, and less than a month since an indictment for embezzlement, they're back. Vintage Jim and Tammy. New dog, children, eyelashes and all, though a bit rusty on technique.
Well, it's been a long time. And, whoops, your microphone just came off.
It was nothing like the old times in the big studio, but today's broadcast to a handful of stations did give Jim Bakker a chance to tell an invisible audience what really caused all his problems, namely his grand plan to build a church to hold 30,000 worshipers, the Crystal Palace.
The devil was mad, and then when we broke ground for the largest church ever built in the history of the world, I think the devil said, this is it. I think I've got to smash Jim and Tammy Bakker.
Like too many people were getting saved. I think the devil was just angry.
No mention of Jessica Hahn, whose affair with Bakker started it all. And certainly no mention of charges that he stole $4 million from supporters. The Bakkers, however, did talk of their ordeal.
When we had absolutely nothing left, reputation destroyed, everything gone.
If Jim and Tammy can survive their Holocaust of 2 years, I know God will help you to survive.
The couple made no direct plea for money. They did thank the unnamed sponsor who has paid for the first month's broadcasts. And callers were told that after that, support may be needed to keep the Bakkers on the air, which clearly is right where Jim and Tammy want to be when they're not in court.
The sun will shine again, thank God.
Susan Spencer, CBS News, Washington.
Hey, how'd it go on the new job, son?
Not bad. You know, they asked me to a meeting today.
They asked the union.
Yeah, there's a meeting on how we can improve quality. Well, they want to know what I thought.
It's not like it was when I was on the line.
You know, I had a pretty good idea.
3 GM makes were rated as the best-built 1988 American cars by their owners in the latest J.D. Power Initial Quality Survey.
Last chance to find out if you're American Family's next $10 million winner. Enter the only sweepstakes with my picture today and watch me announce the winning numbers on TV for not just 1, but 7 big prizes, January 27th. American Families Get Rich Night. You have 7 chances to get rich, even super rich, beyond your fondest dreams. $10 million rich, guaranteed. But this is your last chance. Hurry.
Yes, sir.
Listen carefully. If we don't make 100 cases, they will lose the account. Go back later.
If your long distance sounds bad, get 30 free minutes of crystal clear fiber optic long distance. Call Sprint now and switch.
Next time you get heartburn, consider yourself lucky, because now Rolaids comes in assorted fruit flavors, still calcium-rich, sodium-free, and as effective as ever. Assorted flavored Rolaids. Relief never tasted so good.
Finally tonight, we have a rare look into Outer Mongolia. John Sheehan tells us what's new in one of the world's oldest civilizations.
Traditionally, every Mongolian grew up on the back of a horse. For thousands of years on the vast plains of Central Asia, they have raised their herds, lived exclusively on a diet of milk and meat, and dwelt in dome-shaped yurts that could be moved easily to new grazing land. The sturdy Mongolian pony was and is a central theme of their culture. For the nomads, the wanderers, the idea of owning land was as inconceivable as owning wind or sky. Today, the land belongs to the state. Despite the thriving herds of cattle, sheep, and horses, there are chronic meat shortages because of the huge quotas that have to be exported to the Soviet Union. Outer Mongolia is Russia's experiment in turning a nomadic people into a model communist nation. 1 million Mongolians, about half the population, now live in cities and work in Soviet-built factories. There are an estimated 60,000 Soviet troops stationed in the Mongolian People's Republic.
They're very conscious of the Russian presence here. I think they feel they can't do without them. But on the other hand, sometimes they feel they're a bit heavy-handed.
Mongolians do not, of course, speak of their country as a colony of the Soviet Union. They call the relationship brotherly cooperation. But the brother is big brother, and in Mongolia, Moscow's word is law.
Mongolians were once a deeply religious people. Communist authorities have vigorously restricted the Buddhist church. Only one temple remains open. After 60 years under Soviet influence, Mongolia is struggling to retain remnants of its own culture, the sad music and suppressed literature of an empire once ruled by Genghis Khan. In the communist drive to urbanize the nomads, hundreds of thousands have traded the freedom of the plains for this: the fenced-in yurt slums crowded around the capital, waiting for the apartments and the better life the government has promised, but never been able to provide. John Sheehan, CBS News, Ulaanbaatar.
And that's the news. Bob Schieffer sitting in tonight for Dan Rather. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith. Tomorrow, to raise or not to raise taxes. Also, Chris Matthews on the Cold War and college football's champs on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
I'm Pat Sajak. My new late-night talk show on CBS has to compete with those adult movies